WPW syndrome or Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. Whenever PR interval is shorter than 3 small squares, we must rule out WPW syndrome. Now let us observe this ECG closely to study the features of WPW syndrome. The PR interval is very short, just 2 small squares. There is no isoelectric line between the P wave and the QRS complex. The R wave starts immediately after the P wave, and the QRS complexes is wide, almost 3 small squares wide. Now study the QRS complex more carefully. You will notice that only the initial portion is wide and slurred. The downstroke of the R wave and S wave are perfectly normal. This slurred upstroke on the beginning of the R wave is called as delta wave. The delta wave is seen in those leads which show a tall R wave, usually in lead 1 or V6. It is accompanied by an inverted T wave which is opposite in direction of the QRS complex, indicating abnormal ventricular conduction. Whenever ventricular conduction is via the normal pathway, the T wave is in the same direction as the QRS complex. The slur of WPW syndrome is also seen on the downstroke in the leads showing a predominantly negative QRS complex. Note the slur on the S wave in V1 and the absence of PR segment. It is important to know the presence of WPW syndrome as it often leads to serious tachyarrhythmias in later life. The isoelectric line between P wave and QRS complex is due to the AV nodal delay. But in WPW syndrome, the impulse leaks to the ventricles via an accessory bundle of fibers called bundle of Kent. So the isoelectric line between P wave and QRS complex is replaced by a slurred upstroke. This is another ECG of WPW syndrome. Note the delta wave and inverted T wave in leads V5. Again, slur on the upstroke of R wave in lead V6. And in lead V1, there is negative QRS complex with slur on the downstroke of S wave. Now note the limb leads. Positive QRS in lead 1 and negative QRS in lead 3. That is, there is left axis deviation. WPW syndrome is of two types, type A and type B, also termed as V1 positive and V1 negative. In type A, the accessory fiber of bundles is on the left side. It causes a positive QRS complex in lead V1 and right axis deviation. In type B, the accessory fiber of bundles is on the right side. It causes a negative QRS complex in lead V1 and left axis deviation. This ECG shows negative QRS in V1 with left axis deviation. So this is WPW syndrome type B.